Welcome to A Billion Realities, where we explore all topics related to spirituality, psychology, and the power of the mind. And now your host, Jessica Gerlach.
PodcastCadet.com provides a one-on-one private consultation for anyone, whether you are just starting or already have a podcast that you want to take to the next level. They have the professionals to help you. Visit PodcastCadet.com today and use the code REALITY20 to save 20% off your entire purchase. I've personally used this service, and I can assure you, you will not be disappointed. Welcome back to A Billion Realities. Today on the show, we have musical genius, songwriter, and composer Steve Dorff. Steve has created music for legendary artists such as Celine Dion, Shelton, Ringo Starr, Whitney Houston, Willie Nelson, Cher, and Barbra Streisand, just to name a few. His brilliant talent and music career has landed him his well-earned induction to the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Such a beyond honor to have you on, so thank you. And where are you joining us from today?
I'm in Nashville, Tennessee.
Excellent. And from what I remember, you were in LA before that, right?
Yeah, I grew up in New York, but moved to Los Angeles mid-'70s, and that was really where I lived until just 9 months ago. Moved to Nashville.
Amazing. And what was that transition like from LA to, or from Los Angeles to Tennessee? It's a big difference, right?
Yeah, but I had been coming here so often to work over a 25-year period. I was averaging 6 to 7 trips a year to work here. So I had so many friends and so many, I knew the town, I knew the restaurants. So that the actual transition wasn't as difficult as it might seem. I miss the beaches, and there are certain things about California that I do miss, but I think the ease of living here in Tennessee is it's so much nicer, less traffic, less craziness. So it's been good.
Absolutely. That's amazing. I'm glad to hear that. So I'm from New York as well, and I was so curious to ask you, where exactly in New York did you grow up, and do you have fond memories of New York life?
I do. I still, when I go to New York, I still feel like it's home. The food, you can't beat the food. You can't beat the Italian food. I grew up in Queens, in Forest Hills, and then was there until I went to college at the University of Georgia, and then never really went back to New York other than to visit.
Wow. Do you miss living there, or was it just something you were ready for a change?
Yeah, I wanted to get out of New York. It was, growing up there was great. I still have great friends from, my childhood and some relatives. Once I left, I wanted to go to California to kind of cut my teeth on the music business, and that was where it was all happening. And so I gravitated there, and then, visited New York 2 or 3 times a year, and but being there for 4 or 5 days was about all the energy I could take.
I completely understand what you mean. I grew up in a little bit of a small town outside of the city, but I lived there for a few years when I turned 18, and then I ended up leaving for Toronto. But those few years in the heart of the city, just, it burns you out a bit. It's a lot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it
So
is.
you've had such a full and fascinating career writing songs for some serious legends. I've already mentioned a few in your introduction, but there are a few more that I really want to mention because it truly reveals your musical diversity. And they are the likes of Dionne Warwick, Smokey Robinson, Ray Charles, Dolly Parton, George Strait, Anne Murray, Kenny Rogers, Garth Brooks, and countless others. What
Mm.
has it meant for you to personally work with such icons?
It's kind of unbelievable. I just kind of pinch myself every day thing when I look back, and it's kind of surreal. I've been so blessed uh, to have gotten to work with the greatest voices of this generation, or really any generation. I mean, just Streisand alone is. I've I've done four songs for Barbra. I mean, it's a whole different deal. We're getting to work with Anthony Newley, who a lot of, if I ask my kids who's Anthony Newley, they look at me like, you know, was he a baseball player? No, so Andy Williams, Sammy Davis Jr. When I was a kid, I was starting to work with artists that my parents loved, and I think that's my favorite part of my career, is that diversity, is the fact that I've been able to work with R&B artists and pop artists and country artists and theater, Broadway stars. Michael Crawford, I did an album with Michael Crawford, uh, and a lot of Carol Burnett, and
Wow.
it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. Yeah.
That's unreal, unbelievable, amazing. So, who would you say are some of the artists that really stand out, just off the top of your head that just blew you away that you've worked with?
Well, they all bring something unique and special, because they're all so different. Working with Ringo Starr was a boyhood dream. I mean, that we're getting to work with one of the Beatles, who I idolized as a kid growing up, has to stick out. Uh, they're all so amazing. Every one of them in their own way. I mean, I have some horror stories, but
I'm going to ask you about those later.
I don't know if I can put that out there,
kidding.
but
I'm not going to do that to you.
no, mostly great experiences. And working with voices, because I always joke that when you hear me sing a few songs, everybody instantly realizes why they never heard me on the radio. So to get to work with these incredible, talented voices, and hear them sing the music that's in my head, and come to life, has been just the greatest gift.
That's beautiful. I've heard you sing. You're hard on yourself, I think, but but I know, I can definitely understand what you mean, and each artist has their own specific and special, unique thing about them. So definitely understandable. But you've written over 20 top 10 pop and country hits. So can you tell us about the story behind your first #1 song and the Clint Eastwood film called Every Which Way But Loose?
Yeah, that was I had some songs recorded, and a few that had charted, but never had a top 10 before. And I got this phone call one night from the music supervisor doing the film, a producer named Snuff Garrett. And he called me one night at about, it was dinner time, and he said, I need you to write a song called Every Which Way But Loose for this Clint Eastwood movie. And I said, what does that mean? I'd never heard that phrase before.
Okay.
And he said, I have no idea. All I can tell you is it's about a guy who drives around in an old beat up pickup truck fighting for money, and he has a pet orangutan. I said, oh, that really helps. And so I got off the phone and called my friend Milton Brown, who lives in Mobile, Alabama. Milton and I had written a lot of songs together. And I woke him up, because it was 2 hours later there. It was about, I guess, 10 o'clock there. And I said, Milton, we have to write this song called Every Which Way But Loose. I said, do you know what that means? He said, yeah. He said, I'm going to turn you every which way but loose, and yada, yada, yada. And he said, can we do this tomorrow? Because I'm sleeping. I said, no, I need to have it by tomorrow. And so we wrote it over the phone in about, I would say 30, 40 minutes. And the next day I went in and played it for Snuff Garrett, and he loved it. And he called Clint Eastwood, and we went over to the studio, and I played it for Clint on the piano, and he loved it. And we got Eddie Rabbitt to record it, who was this hot country artist that was really doing great at the time. And it was our first number one.
Wow, what a story. The pressure. You made that sound so easy. And
Well,
I can just imagine the pressure.
It was a lot of pressure. But most of my career has been that way. I always say that I've always had that the pressure of having to have something yesterday. I'd get, especially in the TV and film world where I've done so much work. The music is always the last minute thing that has to be done in post-production, because everything else is finished, and music's like the last long lost stepchild of the business. It's like they just don't give us enough time or enough money or enough budget. And so pressure's always been a good friend of mine in coming up with the right thing at the right time. I know a lot of people don't like the pressure, and they freeze up, but pressure's always been good to me.
That's really great. And I can relate to that, actually. I don't mind some pressure. It kind of gets me going. So that's awesome. I was really curious about that. So I saw in my research that Barbra Streisand's song that you wrote called Higher Ground was originally thought to be perfect for Mariah Carey. So how often does that happen where you write a song for one artist and another artist ends up taking it and turning it into a hit?
Almost 99% of the time. I don't ever, I have written specifically for an artist when there's a project involved, but most of the time when I'm writing, I just try to write the best song I can, and I never know who's gonna do them. I just kind of throw them out there and say a prayer that someone likes it enough to want to record it. But I very rarely sit down and say, hey, I'm going to write a song today for George Strait or Kenny Rogers. It just through the years, which is arguably one of my biggest songs that Kenny made famous. Barry Manilow, Glenn Campbell had both passed on that song before Kenny did it.
Oh,
And
wow.
so there's a lot of that. I Cross My Heart, which was a big number one for George Strait, was originally recorded by Bette Midler, and then she didn't put it on her album. And I played that song for everybody I knew, including my mother, for the next 8 years, and nobody seemed to really like it. And that's the other fun thing, is that most people don't have any idea how long it takes from the inception of the song to when they hear it on the radio. I think most people just hear a song on the radio and they go, "Oh wow, I love that song." They have no idea how long it takes for it to become that hit, you know.
Incredible.
Yeah.
They probably think, "Oh, it's a new song." You're like, "No, it's
Right.
not really a new song."
Right. Right. Right.
Interesting.
Well, in the movies, you see this guy, wringing his hands, sitting at the piano, banging his head against the wall, and then he writes the song, and then in the next scene, you see a 60-piece orchestra playing it, and then in the next scene, he's depositing $8 million in the bank. That's not the way it works.
Unfortunately, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, one of the things I find so interesting about your journey is that you're responsible for numerous songs accumulating over 40 BMI awards, which many people have no idea that you wrote. So, can you tell us a little more about those songs that, were just major hits that, a lot of people didn't know you wrote over the years?
Right. Well, the whole nature of the non-artist songwriter, and when I say that, there's Billy Joel and there's Elton John and there's Lennon and McCartney, and then there are people like me who nobody knows because I'm this anonymous Oz behind the curtain guy who's written the soundtrack of people's lives, and nobody knows who we are because we weren't the face of our songs. The artists who make the songs famous are the face of the songs. I think most people, when they hear through the years, they go, "Oh, I love that Kenny Rogers song." Well, it's not. It's a Steve Dorff song, made famous by Kenny Rogers. But most people don't know that distinction. And it's a great question because I ended up writing my memoir, and it's called I Wrote That One Too, A Life in Songwriting from Willie to Whitney, which kind of delves into that whole question as to, where do these songs come from? Who writes these songs? If you hear Somewhere Over the Rainbow sung, from The Wizard of Oz, most people have no idea who wrote that. They just maybe think, "Oh, Judy Garland
Yes.
made that famous." Yeah, she did. But a guy named Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg wrote that song, and nobody knows who these people are.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty fascinating journey, and probably due to the fact that I wasn't a great singer and didn't really have that. Didn't have the want to be that artist. I just always wanted to be a behind the scenes, in the studio person. So a lot of my songs that like you mentioned, Fire in the Morning, Melissa Manchester, Easy Love, Dionne Warwick, Lay Down and Dance, Garth Brooks. Most people have no idea that I wrote those.
Right.
And that's okay, because as long as I get the royalty checks, the truth is that's kind of the career path I set out to do. I never really had the aspiration to be that concert artist. It's just recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, and with the induction into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, that I've kind of gotten out and started doing these evenings with Steve Dorff, where I sit at the piano and play my hits for an hour and a half, and people start to get that distinction because I tell the stories behind how the songs happened, and that's what people really love to hear, are the stories. How this song grew from being, coming out of the piano, and then Whitney Houston records it some 6 years later. So
yeah,
and the fine line between success and dismal failure, because there are stories behind each and every one of these songs that each song has its own little journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really wanted to catch one of your shows last time. One of the times this past year I was in New York. I didn't, but I
Right.
definitely will because I love that whole concept. And this brings me to another question that I had. At what point did you decide to write your book about being this music man behind the curtain? And, can you tell us what it was like rehashing your entire songwriting career?
Yeah, it was actually quite cathartic. It was overwhelming when I was asked to do it. I had just done a show in Connecticut, and I was in the lobby doing a meet and greet and saying hi to people, and there were CDs for sale and shaking hands, and some woman came over to me and said, you don't really sing worth a damn, but I loved your stories. You should write a book. And I didn't know how to take that, but I said, okay, well, I have enough problems writing a 3.5 minute song. How am I ever going to write a book? And plus I'm too young to write a book. So thank you. And she walked away, and then she came back and she said, you really should write that book. I said, she was a literary agent, which I didn't know.
Okay.
And she said, if I get you a book deal, will you write the book? And I said, sure, like that's never going to happen. And 4 months later, she called me and she said, you better get writing. And so I just started thinking about all the sessions and all the people and all the musicians and all the artists and the studios and the ups and downs and meeting people on the ladder going up that you meet on the way down as well, and so I formulated kind of chapters, and then I actually sat down every night and just started remembering details about each individual chapter. The whole process took about 10 or 11 months, almost a year, and that was quite a journey, going back and remembering things and digging up old session reports to see who played on what, which was really a lot of fun. And because when you're living it and when you're doing it, you kind of never look back. You just keep looking forward. So looking back was quite an amazing process.
That's very interesting. I can imagine, all the emotions that it brought up, reliving, and like you said, kind of
Oh,
digging
yeah.
around who was there.
And I lost a lot of people while I was writing the book. So at the end of certain chapters, I would do these little anecdotal paragraphs. Greg Lake from Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Alan Thicke from Growing Pains, which I did all the music, Robert Urich from Spencer for Hire. I did all of those episodes of that show. And of course, my son, Andrew, who I lost, who actually wrote the foreword to the book 3 months before he passed away. So
wow.
it was,
Sorry to hear that.
it was quite a journey in itself getting the book, but it done, but it's out, and it's you can find it on my website, stevedorff.com, and it's really been a great experience having it.
Excellent. What has it been like for you being nominated for Emmys and Grammys and ultimately being inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame?
For me, the biggest award you can get as a songwriter is being inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in New York. It's you're looking at the Gershwins and Lennon and McCartney and Elton John and Bernie Taupin and all the great Bacharach and David, all the greatest songwriters of all time, and to be included in that circle was, every award you could get wrapped into one.
Absolutely.
the Grammys and the Emmys and the Oscar nominations are all incredible, and to be nominated is just such an award in itself, because it's so difficult to write something that gets to that level of achievement. But they're very political. All awards are. But the Songwriters Hall of Fame, to me, represents an entire career. And so yeah, the night I was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame was maybe the most emotional night of my life. It was pretty incredible.
I saw the video. It was very moving. It brought me to tears. So yeah, I can just imagine how incredible that was. So I'm so curious, your childhood, how did you relate to music as a child?
It's in my book, but I'll shorten it. I was born with this thing called synesthesia, and I didn't know what it was. I just, like everybody, tastes and smells and sees all the senses. For me, whenever I'd hear music, if I'd close my eyes, I saw colors, and they represented to me what the music looked like that I was hearing. And this goes back to my mother tells me in the crib, because I'd be banging my head against the mattress doing these guttural humming. And she said, well, this kid's either got serious brain damage or he's singing. And the truth is, I was hearing orchestras in my head ever since I can remember. And whenever I'd see something or hear something or visualize something, it expressed itself in music in my head. I had this little mini orchestra in my head, and it wasn't till years and years later I was talking with a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and I was explaining, when I hear music, I close my eyes and I see these little plasma bubbles, kind of like a lava lamp. Remember those? Yes. Lava lights? Yeah. Absolutely. And he said, "Oh, that's synesthesia." And I said, "Am I going to die?" And he said, "No." He said, "It's this crossbreeding of the senses, where," and I think he mentioned 4% of the population experience it. And so, to answer your question, music was, I saw it and heard it from as a child. When I would go to a Little League game, if someone hit a home run and everybody in the stands were cheering, I was underscoring him, in my head, hearing a march as he was rounding the bases. Or if I was walking to school and got into a snowball fight with friends, they'd all be trying to get out of the way of getting hit by snow and ice, and I'd be standing in the middle getting hit from all sides and orchestrating the whole thing in my head. So I was a weird kid.
That is fascinating, though. That was actually one of my questions for you. Synesthesia, I heard you mention it in another interview, and I was like, wow, okay, you need to hear about that. So I'm glad that you told us that story and what that is, because I don't think
and it's not always music. I've met some people that if they taste coffee, or if they taste a certain thing, they will see certain things that are unrelated to that. Or if they touch certain things, they'll all of a sudden hear things. It's kind of a crossbreeding of the senses. It's a kind of a strange thing. In my case, it was music, and seeing what the music looked like in my head. Of course, it wasn't notes, because I didn't know what notes were. But I think later on, as I developed composing my own music in my head, by seeing it visually, it helped me to fast track learning about orchestration and the difference between an oboe and a clarinet, um, the strings, the brass. It was all. It's hard to explain. It's hard to explain, but it was like a self-education that when I then decided this is what I'm going to do for a living, I better learn how to write this stuff down. And I started books about theory, and it made it much easier for me because it translated much easier.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So when would you say you realized that you had a pretty serious gift?
I think very early on. I think I didn't know what I assumed everybody did that. I really did. I remember asking my mother. We were in the car, and it was raining, and I was in the back seat. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, and she had the windshield wipers on, and the rhythm of the windshield wipers, of course, all of a sudden I'm hearing this symphony in my head, and I asked her. I said, when we got out of the car, when she stopped the car, I said, "How did you hear that?" And she just looked at me like I was from another planet. She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, how did you, what music did you hear?" And so, yeah, it was, I think I realized it in my early teens that, yeah, this is something that I'm doing that not many people are doing. Certainly not my friends, And so, yeah, that I think I realized it pretty early on.
Cool. So would you say there's a sort of winning formula in creating hit songs, or is it more of a visceral experience? I mean, you kind of just touched on that, but when you're writing a hit song, I guess you're not writing it to be a hit. You're just, kind of writing a song.
Yeah, I think what makes a hit song, first of all, there's a lot of luck involved, for it to, a lot of being at the right place at the right time. In my case, and I write about this, there's a lot of manifest destiny, willing something to happen, willing something uh, to become reality. That doesn't mean that always happens. I kind of wanted to will myself to be shortstop for the New York Yankees, but that was never going to happen because I couldn't hit the ball out of the infield. But in terms of music, it's writing something that that people can hum. It's writing something that people can relate to in the lyric. I always try to write something that Bob and Mary in Des Moines, Iowa are going to listen to and say, "Oh, that's our song," or "We got married to that song." Because if they're relating to it, everybody can. And so for me, the formula is trying to write something very relatable, very universal, and hopefully something that people sing and can't get out of their head. And then once you have that song, then it's a matter of being at the right place at the right time, and sometimes just plain luck, having the right person hear it, the right artist, the right producer. It's kind of like any business, really. I mean, it's like writing a screenplay or being an actor or an actress. A lot of it is, just being lucky too,
Mm-hmm.
But I think to have a career, you have to be really good at what you do and do it over and over and over and over again, over a period of over a career.
Makes sense. Mm-hmm. Would you say that a majority of your music is written based on your mood or emotions in a particular period of your life that you write it in?
Yes. Yeah. I think just about every song I've ever written comes from a place of experience, something I've experienced, whether it be hurt, whether it be pain, whether it be joy, love, breakup. Written a couple too many of those.
That's a big one.
Yeah. I think you have to write what you know, and otherwise nobody's going to relate to it. If you're just making stuff up or being cliche, you know, rhyming June with spoon. No, it's gotta come from this organic, experienced place. So it's real.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's got to have the emotion behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So, would you say you prefer writing music alone or in collaboration with others, and why?
Just about every well, it's two separate things. When I'm writing to picture for film or television, and I'm just doing music, I only write music by myself. When I'm writing songs, I learned early on, maybe in my mid-teens, that having someone that was lyrically stronger than I was, words, was really a plus. I mean, I had written a lot of songs myself, words and music, but music was always came so easy to me, and the lyrics were very difficult. And great lyricists, great lyric writing is a totally separate talent. And I was very blessed to have met along the way some of the great world-class lyricists to write with, and so I love collaborating on songs with other people, but I write the music myself.
Interesting. Okay. So, I'm so curious about this as well. So, when it comes to composing music, do most composers have like a common denominator about them, something that makes them all very similar, the way they think or their creative process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I certainly know a lot of composers. It's a very solitary job. It's, we sit in a room like right now I'm sitting in my control room of my home studio, and I'm looking at a keyboard and speakers and a big computer screen, and I'm in here hours every day just by myself, playing and dreaming up things, and kind of like a painter would with a blank palette. And I think most composers, especially film composers, we look at film, we look at picture without any sound to it other than dialogue, and we have to visualize what the music's going to sound like, underscoring whatever's going on, whether it be a helicopter chase, whether it be a romantic love scene, whether it's a brutal, vicious beating. The music's got to underscore what the action is. And so I think we all approach that the same way, the basic approach. Now, what the music's going to sound like is going to be different from every composer, because everybody's going to hear it differently. But I think the approach to how to do the job at hand is the same. And I think, most people that write music, their process may be different, but they're dreaming up melodies, and they're dreaming up orchestrations, and they're dreaming up, it's like a great painter, staring at a blank canvas and all of a sudden doing this incredible painting.
Right.
I don't know how painters do that. I can't even paint a wall, So, it's just part of that, whatever that creative part of the brain is.
Right. So, when there is a butting of the heads in a creative pursuit, how do you handle that?
Fortunately, I haven't had a whole lot of that. Usually the butting of the heads is with for me, has been with either a producer who thinks he knows more about music than I do, or a director. The thing about music is, and there's a joke amongst composers, is everybody knows their job and the music because everybody loves music and everybody has their idea of what the music should be, but they don't know how to do it. And so I've experienced several times being hired to do the music for certain, either a movie or television movie or a documentary, where I've written the music and played it for the powers that be, the director and the producers. And, personality differences, who knows what triggers it, but they go, oh no, that's not at all what I'm hearing. You've got to change that. And that's tough to handle because there's a reason why I heard it the way I heard it.
Right.
And so for me to go, oh, you're right, I'll just write something else, it's not going to happen, because there's a reason why I wrote it. It's because that's what spoke to me in what I was watching. And so, like I said, though, fortunately, it's only happened one or two times for me. So, and at one time, I felt like I handled it well, and another time I felt like I didn't, and just said, you know what, I'm not your guy then, because this is how I'm hearing it, and if you don't hear it this way, well, then find someone that hears it more your way.
It's I guess sometimes the synergy just isn't there. So
exactly, I think it always comes down to personalities and being collaborative and most of the, I consider myself really easy to get along with, and maybe that's why I haven't had those issues. I have friends and colleagues that I've heard horror stories, so I've been pretty lucky there. And in the case of songs, there are sometimes artists will hear a song and they'll go, hey, can you, I don't quite understand that line. Is there a way you could change that line? Or would you mind if I sing it this way and maybe go up instead of down? And whatever makes it better,
You sound like you seem like a very calm and kind person. So yeah, I think that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
You probably handle things very well. That's good. You've been lucky though that, like you said, and it's probably partially because of the way that you handle it.
Yeah, and I think that's true in anything, whether it be sports or actors and actresses. Certain actors have, their personalities precede them, and reputations precede them. And I think it's the same with songwriters and composers. There are some that are more difficult than others. There are some artists that are more difficult than others, recording artists that I've worked with that have not been fun. And then there are those that are just joyful to work with, so.
Got some divas in there, right?
Oh yeah.
Part of the business.
I think I've worked with just about all of them.
It looks that way, yeah. So I grew up in the 80s watching the show Growing Pains, and just hearing that song brings back a ton of happy memories from my childhood. Can you tell us the story about how you got involved in writing the music for that show?
I sure can, because I tell it every night when I'm playing.
Oh, wow. Great.
Yeah. I got a call to go over to Warner Brothers Studios to watch a pilot. My agent called me and said they're interested in you maybe writing a theme for the pilot. And you know what a pilot is. It's 22 minutes of a new show that they're trying to sell. And so I went over and there were 3 executive producers, and met with them for a minute. And they said, well, why don't you go watch the show, the pilot, by yourself and get a feel for it, and then we'll talk music. And I said, great. And they set me up in a screening room, and I watched 22 minutes of maybe the worst television show I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
And it was pretty cheesy. You know, Alan Thicke playing the psychiatrist doctor, stay-at-home dad, the mom newspaper reporter, the 3 kids, it was pretty mindless TV. And I watched it and came out, and they were all smiling. They said, well, what'd you think? And I said, yeah, it was definitely on the screen. And we started talking about music, and one guy said, well, I worked on Welcome Back, Kotter, and I love John Sebastian. If you could put some of that flavor in. And I said, well, I don't play the auto harp, but I'll, let me consider that. And the second guy said, I love Pat Metheny. I'm thinking, okay, jazz guitar with John Sebastian, how's that going to work? And the third guy looked at me and he just said, Latin percussion. It's got to really cook, And I'm thinking, okay, these guys all have separate ideas of what they want, which goes to your other question.
Right.
And how am I going to make this work? And I leave and I call my agent up from the car and I say, can you get me off this project? Because there's no way I can come up with what's going to make them happy. There's way too many cooks in the kitchen here. And she said, no, just, it's a pilot. It's probably not going to go anyway. So just do your best. And, because we don't want to make that call and they'll get a bad vibe from you. And I said, all right, okay. So I went home and I was having a writing session with John Bettis, a great lyricist, and we were going to finish up a song that we were really excited about. And I said to John, I said, hey, before we get back to that, will you help me write this? I got to write this 30-second theme song. It's about this family, yada, 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 and it's called Growing Pains. And he said, God, that's a terrible title for a song. And I agreed. And he said, how about, so I gave him the 25 words or less idea of what the show was about. And he starts writing this on a yellow pad, this thing like he's writing the Pledge of Allegiance. And he sticks it in front of me on the piano. And it's as long as we got each other. And I looked at it, wrote it in about 10 minutes. And then we went on to write this song that never amounted to anything. The one we were excited about. Oh, wow. And I called the producers the next day and I said, yeah, I've been slaving over this thing all night. And if you want to come hear it, I think I've got something. And they came over and I realized as I was getting ready to play it, that it had absolutely nothing to do with any of the elements that they had all wanted. And so I started panicking and played them the song and looked up and they were all smiling and they all said, that's exactly what we wanted. Unreal. And the show ran for 8.5 seasons. It was the #1 show on ABC, and which shows how little I know about network television. And it was one of the great lucky experiences. We did 5 different recordings of this theme with B.J. Thomas, Dusty Springfield. We actually had a hit record with B.J. and Dusty, and on the theme, because we wrote a second verse, an expanded version. And it's one of those great little stories and very, very rewarding projects that and then all of a sudden my television career took off because of that. I started getting calls to do Murphy Brown and My Sister Sam and Major Dad, and it just kind of mushroomed from that. It was It was great.
That is phenomenal. I think that every single person who grew up in the 80s or even early 90s, they know that song from Growing Pains and they know the
Oh,
show.
yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. No, it's funny because BJ Thomas, who's a dear friend, with the songs he's had hits with, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head and Eyes of a New York Woman. And, I just can't help believing. I mean, one hit after another. When he plays out, he says he'll play the theme from Growing Pains and the place explodes.
See?
And it's the power of television, because how else can you reach 60 million people in a season?
That's why they call it programming.
Right.
Well, I saw that, you made music as well for so many other TV shows, as you just mentioned a few, and films that I had no idea as well that you composed for. And that's, like Murder, She Wrote, Columbo. The films were Rocky IV, Bronco Billy, Pink Cadillac. What were some of the others?
Some of my favorites were the Hugh Wilson movies. Hugh was just a genius. He created WKRP in Cincinnati for television, but then he went on to do films, The First Wives Club, and I did a movie for him called Blast from the Past with Alicia Silverstone and Brendan Fraser, and I did Dudley Do-Right with Brendan Fraser for Hugh, and I did Rustler's Rhapsody, which was this spoof of the B-Western, which was probably my favorite film I've ever scored. It was a huge bomb at the box office, but loved doing that movie. And of course, I did Five with Clint Eastwood, and I love Bronco Billy. That was a challenging and fun film. Curly Sue for John Hughes. It was the last movie John ever did before he passed away tragically. But John had done, so many great movies. He was a brilliant writer director as well. Last Boy Scout was fun at Warner's. Yeah, it was. Again, I've been so lucky to to have gotten to work with so many great directors, great producers, great artists.
They were lucky too.
Well, we like to think so. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank
so
you.
I'm so curious. Do you have a favorite story in your 4-decade-long music career?
It's hard to pick a favorite, just like it's hard to pick, I get asked a lot, what's the favorite song you've ever written? They're all like children. How do you pick your favorite kid? It's writing songs and having experiences. Yeah, there are some that stand out obviously better than others, but for different reasons. Being in the studio with Ringo and actually pushing the talkback button down and saying, "Hey, can we sing that one more time, Ringo?" I mean, that was like being in a Fellini movie for me. That was such a surreal moment because I worship the Beatles, and to with all the amazing artists and people I grew up loving that I got to work with, Tom Jones, Engelbert Humperdinck, Dusty Springfield. I mean, I love Dusty Springfield. And she was one of the most difficult artists I've ever worked with in the studio. So favorite story? No, all my favorite stories are in my book.
Excellent advice. Get his
book.
Do
you have my book? Do you have my book?
Not yet, but I will definitely be getting your book and reading it as soon as possible, because I just talked to you, a week ago, and I was like, can you be on my show next week?
Yeah.
Right? But I
well,
definitely...
you can get it from my website, and I'll sign a very special little thing to you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So I'm so curious, before we wrap things up, You know, obviously rejection is a huge part of the music business. So even as a person with your accolades, you've had to endure a certain amount of rejection throughout your career. Is it something that gets easier to handle with time?
Um, you ask some great questions, I gotta say,
Ah,
Jessica.
thank you.
The normal thing is, what would you say to a person, and about rejection? And what I do usually say is, if you're not, and I think this holds true for a screenwriter or an actor or an actress or any creative field, because rejection is so much a part of the entertainment business. I would say if you're not ready to pick yourself up and dust yourself off 150 times a day, you probably should not be in this line of work, because that's what happens for whatever reason, whether it's jealousy, or in the case of what I was talking about earlier, a producer who thinks he knows more about music than you do, even though he can't tell a C sharp from an X. You run into this stuff, and it's does it ever get easier, is your question. And I think it probably does. I've never been asked that question, but I still get rejected daily, weekly, on songs that I'll submit to an artist that I'll think is perfect, and they pass, and they go, yeah, not one of your best. It hurts, it stings for a minute, but whereas maybe when I was 19 or 20 or 21 and just starting out and really hungry, that sting would last a week or a month. now
Right.
now it now it hopefully only stings for an hour or 2 hours, and then I brush it off and go, okay, next.
Wonderful. That's progress. Absolutely. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the best advice you've ever been given, and how have you been able to use that advice in your life and in your career?
I think what I said earlier today to you is, a great writer, great songwriter who I worshipped, said, "Write what you know,"
Hmm.
and I've always stuck to that. I don't write about freight trains. I don't write about uh, you know things that I personally have never experienced or can't relate to, because it's not going to be honest. So I write about what I personally have experienced, what I totally can relate to. And I think that's served me very well.
Excellent. And what kind of advice do you give young music artists in such a tough business?
Well, I've tried to pass that along. I tell writers, because they ask the same questions. What comes first, the words or the music? It happens all different ways. I tell them, write what you know. Um, be prepared to pick yourself up and dust yourself off when someone rejects you, and shake it off, and on to the next.
Fantastic
That's
advice.
Yeah, that's the best. Really, it's true. It's true.
It
It's
resonates
true.
with me for sure. So I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way. I also saw in my research that your first love is actually musical theater. So what can we expect next? Do you have any plans with that?
Well, it's funny you ask. Our our musical version of Pure Country, which was the George Strait movie, was set to debut at Theater Under the Stars in Houston, which is one of the biggest rep theaters in the country. They started Beauty and the Beast. They've started many Broadway shows, and we were set to open on April 16th. And this beautiful pandemic of ours completely shut that down. And
Oh,
so we're in limbo there. I had 9 shows that were canceled of my evenings with Steve Dorff.
oh
So it's
man.
been, this has been a rugged time. for creative people, but we're hopeful that Pure Country will just get pushed to maybe next year. There's so many moving parts to theater projects. I have another show called Josephine, which is the Josephine Baker story, which also is in various stages of trying to poke its head to be on a stage. There are so many things have to line up with theater. It's actors, actresses, singers, musicians, producers, availability of theaters. Broadway, basically, I don't think is going to come back until next year, 2021.
Wow.
It's kind of it's been the saddest thing for me of this year, because we were so close to having this incredible production being done in Houston, and just went up in a puff of smoke.
Wow, like so many projects, and I hope that everything goes back to normal and you can pick it back up and everything will fall into place.
Yeah.
So best of luck on that.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you one more thing before we wrap it up. What
Okay.
is one thing that you want the world to know about Steve Dorff?
Oh man.
It's a big question.
Wow, that is a big question. I want the world to know, because there are a lot of things about me that I don't want the world to know. Which I'll discuss with you after this goes off the air.
Sounds good.
No, I would say just that that I was really so dedicated and so married to creating music and passionate about everything I do in music. I'm an extremely passionate person, and I think that's where the music comes from. And so that I was extremely dedicated to my craft.
Beautiful, and it shows.
Hmm.
So before we go as well, can you just tell people where they can find your book and the name of it one more time, please?
Yeah, the book is called I Wrote That One Too, A Life in Songwriting from Willie to Whitney. And it's available on my website, stevedorff.com, where I will personally sign them. Or you can get it on Amazon, where you can get everything. But it's a little more personalized if you buy it from my website. And we've just introduced a store on my website. It's a totally redesigned website. It's www.stevedorff.com, and there's books and CDs and stuff available there.
Excellent. I'm so grateful that you came on the show today and shared all of your amazing insight and experiences, your whole journey. So I really appreciate you. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you for asking, and I can't wait to meet you.
Same here. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of A Billion Realities with your host, Jessica Gerlach. Visit us online at abillionrealities.com and follow us on social media at A Billion Realities. A Billion Realities is available on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. A Billion Realities is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more great episodes and content, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and until next time, remember, we are all but one of a billion realities.